Good morning, everybody. Moscow American back here on this bright, not completely bright, slightly overcast Friday morning here. And I'm obviously not near the Kremlin and not near the center. I'm back up north, going for another walk. I pre-apologize now in case I'm panting. I went for a run, kind of ran a couple miles to get up this way, kind of past the edges of the city, get out in nature a little bit, and now I'm a little bit tired as I try to film, but I will soldier on through. So anyway, more stuff going on. Russian news is reporting President Putin gave a speech in which he was asked about meeting with Zelensky, and gave a very shrewd diplomatic answer. He says, well, I've got nothing against it in principle, but there's a lot of preconditions and things that need to get worked out. There's some issues that need to be solved first. And so I can't really meet with him until that happens. And unfortunately, that's a ways off. Once again, don't slam the door. But as I said in my last video, yeah, no. That's not going to be something he's lining up to do. Doesn't want to give Zelensky that legitimacy, especially after that's been such a strong Russian point that they've underlined, is that he's no longer the constitutional president of Ukraine since his term expired, and he's still in charge. It is interesting. I do notice something in the American media. Once I was coming from the White House spokesperson, kind of basically saying that, doubling down on that whole thing about, well, Putin is going to need to meet with Zelensky. So I don't know. This might be leading up to another one of those clashes where Trump is going to get all mad about something because he has it in his mind and that doesn't quite work out. We'll see. It's muddy along here. If I suddenly drop out of view, I probably slipped on something. Anyway, so that going on. And then Trump is lining up that meeting fast. He was kind of asked once again about, hey, has the deadline come up for those sanctions? He's like, kind of repeats, yeah, well, it's coming up. Yeah, it's come up for that ceasefire deadline. Very disappointed. And then completely evasive on whether or not they're applying those sanctions. Yeah, same thing I was saying last time, right? He's buying himself time. He was the one on a deadline. And now this rush to go meet Putin in person very much seems to me optics, right? You got to emphasize that something big's happening. Don't emphasize that you kind of got caught in your own timeline. And at the same time, Putin's more than willing to meet with him. Don't think he's going to budge an inch. Trump's going to run with some narrative about how now the war's going to be over in a week. He's going to go there and he's going to use his art of the deal on him, and he's immediately going to cooperate, and it's all going to be over. So I'm expecting all the hype to be for this. It's all going to be handled next week or next 2 weeks, wherever. All right, they're discussing places to meet. I think they were floating the UAE recently. Yeah, the thing I'm worried about is there's going to be all this hype, just like with the Iran negotiations. It all falls through, and that's used as the justification to amp things up. With how Trump has acted in the past, with that sort of bad faith with the Iran talks, I won't lie, it makes me nervous. I don't think, personally, he's had that kind of a historic relationship with Russia, right? With Iran, yeah, assassinated Soleimani, all this kind of stuff. He seems to have a very visceral dislike or even hatred towards Iran. I don't think it's as dug in with Russia, so I think it's less likely there's this sort of intentional bad faith acting going on, or at least what looked like intentional bad faith acting when it happened with Iran. But it's always a possibility right now, especially when he's got the Lindsey Grahams and all talking to him. Or it's a possibility it's just going to work out that way. He'll come in being like, I'm going to fix things. Doesn't get fixed, gets super ticked off. Lindsey Graham and them were like, you know what? And then everything falls apart from there. So a little bit nervous about that, but we'll see what happens there. So, also recently saw the news that Lula, right down in Brazil, and Modi are supposed to be having big talks, try to hammer out some responses to all the aggression aimed at them by the US and the tariffs. Yeah, this whole thing with India continues to look like it's backfiring, right? There was a Russian news source that's always pretty pessimistic. They were pointing out that there's been potentially some talks on sort of a pause as they negotiate things over Russian oil with one of the big Indian companies. But then we've also had the news, the F-35s and the continuing on with oil. So I doubt that's going to hold. Seems like all the signaling is more towards India hardening, if anything. Seems like they're trying to be diplomatic. They actually have a sense of diplomatic professionalism. But when I take everything on balance, some of the stuff that seems like they're trying to get along with the U.S., and then some of the stuff that seems like they're trying to emphasize sovereignty and hardening their position, feels like the balance or the momentum is moving more and more towards taking a harder line and standing up for themselves. So we'll see on that. I was also very surprised. Gallup, of all places, put out a poll today. Not today, it was yesterday, a couple days ago. I just saw it, about polling in Ukraine, where they were asking people about wanting to continue the war or have an immediate negotiated solution. And it was 69% of people saying they wanted a negotiated solution. I think it was worded as kind of like as soon as possible. And it was only 24% of people who said they wanted to fight on until victory. I mean, I guess that still means that there's 24% of people that are somewhat delusional at this point. But still, that's a big swing. It was over 70% way back in 2022 when they did a similar poll that said they wanted to fight on to victory. So it's almost like the numbers have completely flipped. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's a point at which negotiating might be the will of the people, Mr. Green shirt, camo shirt, whatever. Maybe there's a point at which it's the will of the people, but wait a minute. You're not part of your elected term, so I guess that doesn't really matter. You don't have to worry about your electorate. You don't have to worry about your electoral base anyway. Forgot about that. That kind of went away a long time ago. So, oh well. A little piece of Russian news that was going around that I found, I don't know, I can't say funny, it was just more culturally indicative or interesting. Was there's this little area in the south of Moscow. It's actually outside of Moscow city proper. There's a factory there that actually has a lot of workers from India, and apparently there's paperwork just submitted to get the approval to build a full-scale Indian temple there. And Moscow's a humongous city, lots of immigrants. So being from the U.S., where I'm used to, people throwing up mosques and all stuff like this here, there, and everywhere, it doesn't stand out as much. But I was actually quite surprised. It's been shared around quite a bit on the news, and I was surprised more by the negativity. Have these people? There's one. It's a smaller news source, but popping in and being like, "Well, see what this out of control multiculturalism gets you." Right, we're handing away our culture. I was like, wow, it is interesting. See a country that has a stronger remaining sense of its cultural cohesion, that this is still looked at as, well, we don't mind Indians being here. We don't mind them worshiping. The building an official temple, no, that goes against the cultural landscape. There's even a local news Telegram channel that's just kind of a Moscow-wide one. I was surprised, the ratio of likes to dislikes was 2 to 1. No, sorry, reverse that. 1 to 2, right? So twice as many dislikes and thumbs down over the announcement of this plan to put this temple there. I was struck by one of the high-ranked comments of somebody coming in there saying, and are they going to start building prominent, Orthodox churches in India now? I mean, are they going to start approving that and being more positive to Orthodox Christianity? Oh, it's very interesting. You definitely see this kind of shift towards there being even if a lot of people are still pretty nominally non-religious, there's definitely a shift towards at least a cultural sense of, no, this is tied to who we are. That definitely seem to have gone away a lot in the U.S. I mean, there's parts, you go down to parts in the south and all where there's some of it, but it's definitely going away quickly, whereas this is Moscow. Moscow, if anything, is the most liberal part of Russia, and there's still kind of this reaction, well, no, that goes against the culture. What are you doing here? Come on, no. Yeah, it's interesting because you do have like mosques in all certain parts of Russia. I think there's even a couple here in Moscow, as I recall. But still, there's a little bit more of a pass on that because a large part of, there's different territories in Russia that are traditionally Muslim. That's what their population comes from. So there's kind of like this understanding that that's okay, a little bit. It's still not enthusiastic acceptance when it's kind of outside of those regions. So right, it might be fine in Kazan or somewhere, but still people aren't quite wild about it when it's outside there. It's almost kind of treated as, well, that's their sort of area there. Anyway, though, very, very interesting difference. And since for some reason I always kind of find out this interesting news about stuff falling apart in the West, or the erosion of traditional culture and things like that, it was a story coming out of Britain that now the government's offering lots and lots of incentive money to basically push small farmers out of business, especially those who raise like sheep. So parts of like Scotland, England, they're offering all this incentive money that comes out to more than they would make running their family farms. And it's all because of the environment. All to save the environment, because pushing small family farms, small local food production out of business in favor of large corporate, mass-produced, potentially government-controlled businesses, that's definitely going to help the environment, right? These big giant companies, they're definitely going to save the environment. That's the answer. Definitely nothing to do with taking over. No. Those big corporate run, factory farming type stuff. That's known for its green initiatives. It's known for how environmentally friendly it is. Really. So one last piece of news. Heads of Armenia and Azerbaijan, they're supposed to be meeting with Trump, from what I hear, to try and hammer out a peace deal, because these two countries have had these ongoing territorial disputes on Nagorno-Karabakh, this area. They've both claimed they used to be, Soviet republics. So yeah, ever since that time, there's been some these disputes ongoing with how the territorial stuff fell out after the Soviet Union and all. Anyway, be honest, I kind of have a bad feeling about this. It was, as I recall, it was Reuters that was dropping this story saying that the rumor is that Trump's going to try and convince them to hand over this stretch of this sort of route between it's sort of in this area here under American control. It's kind of a strategic area. It's just rumors. Like, something came out a while back and Armenia denied it back then. It was a few months ago, I want to say, if my memory serves correctly. But who knows? It might end up being true. And remember, we're having this whole Ukraine conflict because Russia did not like the idea of the US or NATO trying to get a hold of these areas right on its doorstep that would pose a threat to their security interests. Well, guess what? This is just another doorstep to another door. Who knows? This might not actually be the case. Maybe Trump will just actually try to get a peace deal and just actually add something else to his list of things to demand that Nobel Peace Prize for. Who knows? But have a bad feeling about this. We're going to see what actually comes out over this, but this might be the further confirmation of the rumors and indications of how the US is trying to really get a foothold in the Caucasus to use against Russia. We'll see. Also, more stuff in Moldova as well. I'll swing back to that one probably on another time. I've had some more time to do more thorough research into that. Anyway, though, one thing I wanted to talk about as an actual bit of discussion, because I keep having this discussion with people I know, especially from the US, is what happened to Trump, right? It's like he's become Biden a little bit. I remember those times when probably certain people were kind of desperate just to get Biden out because it seemed like he was getting so unstable. We were starting to get worried that we were going to get nuked because he was going to go start World War III. And now all of a sudden, Trump's not much better. And Trump was criticizing him once upon a time of how unstable he was, right? How he was risking our safety, all this kind of stuff. Not putting America first. And now we have Trump trying to continue Biden's sanctions, getting just about as involved with the Ukraine stuff as anyone else. We have bombing Iran, and we all have we remember those old tweets from before he was even president, criticizing, wasn't he criticizing Obama way back when? About how his positions, his stuff with Iran wasn't being handled well and could lead to a war? Or was it the Biden administration in between? I can't remember. There's some old tweets I remember looking at way back when. Anywho, it's like Trump is just doing a 180, right? His disaster relief funding, right? You can only get that if you support Israel. America first, right? America first. You get my point. Yeah, it's like everything's spun out of control. It's like he's not even the same person anymore. Now, I know, in due fairness, he did start the weapons support for Ukraine. Not actually Obama, it was actually Trump. Well, Obama was kind of starting just technically without his knowledge, though he probably knew. But anyway, you get my point. But still, under Trump, we did have some of that stuff. So I can't say it's completely out of left field, right? We did have the assassination of Soleimani. So I guess I have a few things to point out on this question of what happened to Trump. One, he did a lot more of this stuff than we give him credit for the first go round. I think just a lot of people gave him a pass because he was undergoing so much pressure. All the Russiagate stuff, he seemed like he was a president with his hands somewhat tied. So there was more of this perception that he got backed into a corner where he had to do stuff. And so we kind of gave him a pass. Well, this time around, there's no backed into a corner, hands tied. So it's becoming more obvious that it's him this go around. So that's one thing. Another thing I keep hearing people kind of point out is saying he is getting older. And he went through a lot of stress during the election, right? He was almost killed. There might be a certain point at which he was he was keeping his energy up and his sharpness up because he was so geared towards winning that election. And now that it's over, it's almost kind of like he's starting to have some of the Biden issues, right? The brain's not as sharp as it was. He's not a young guy anymore. I think there's some possibility of that factoring in terms of how suggestible he feels these days. It feels like, Trump's policy, just like Biden, it's going to change every single day depending on who he last talked to, right? I suspect there probably is a piece of that factoring in. A couple of other things, though, consider. I mentioned this before. It's just Trump does have a massive ego. And in his first term, he was getting constant pushback, right? There's all the never Trumpers, people attacking him. And I almost wonder if that kind of balanced it out, right? He had people telling him he was awful in the Republican Party, fighting him, all this stuff. So he had to kind of keep his ego in check, look like he had a plan, and try to balance against pushback. Now, it's like he has such complete control in the party that I don't think he's having to worry about the criticism as much. He can just kind of make announcements and everyone goes along with it, right? I know J.D. Vance in the past has said a lot of stuff that does not match up with what Trump's been doing, and you notice J.D. Vance has gotten really quiet, right? Well, if he wants to be heir apparent and be president someday, he can't really be shooting his mouth off too much and go to war with Trump. So he knows he just gets very quiet. I doubt he's saying as much these days, right? I don't know if everyone remembered the Star Wars movies, right? They had the original movies that everyone liked, and they had the prequels that caused such a kind of hate reaction when they came out. But I remember people claiming that, with the originals, when he made these movies, George Lucas was, he would listen to people, right? People could come along and say, this dialogue is terrible. And he would change it, right? The original actors. And then when he came along and made the prequels, he's a legend now. And so everything he would decide, people just say, oh yeah, that's great, that's brilliant, let's do that, that sounds awesome. And so a lot of his problems just went right on through and sort of helped drag the movies down a bit. Whereas before that, people pushed back. People offered, constructive criticism. I kind of wonder with Trump whether they're not getting somewhat of a situation like that right now. He doesn't have the pushback anymore, and that ego's out of control. Another big thing, though, I really feel like he's changed a lot ever since that assassination attempt. As in, I'm not saying like PTSD trauma type stuff. He obviously has a lot of courage, right? He got back up, shook his fist, right? In a lot of ways, that might have sealed the election. Who knows? A lot of people wouldn't have been able to get up like that and be that, show that much courage. But at the same time, the amount of stuff, of compliments poured out from the Republican base that almost sounded messianic, almost treating him as though he was some sort of specially appointed savior from God for the U.S. And so I remember we had the anniversary of the attempted assassination not long ago, and all these mainline Republicans who aren't the most moral, religious people in their personal lives sometimes, or the stuff they support, all of a sudden coming out and being like, he was appointed by God to make America great again. I don't know. Like, I've seen how he turned on anyone who opposed him during the Iran stuff. I'm almost starting to wonder if he doesn't have a little bit of this sort of savior complex now ever since then. This kind of, well, he always did, but I feel like it might have gotten worse since then. There seems to be more of this, right? And people pushing this, well, you were raised up by God to protect Israel and stuff like that, right? I don't know. It does seem like there's this kind of sense that he's impatient. He's not looking at himself as a person with limitations who has to work and plan. He seems to be just impatiently pushing forward as though he thinks he has a mandate to save the world by snapping his fingers. And I might be wrong. I just feel like timeline-wise, it's gotten a lot worse. Even on the campaign trail, I swear it was already the beginnings of this. And now the last thing I wanted to mention is his lack of grounding from the very beginning, right? Make America great again, the big slogan, right? I don't know. That slogan's starting to sound a little bit like democracy on the one hand, or even calling everything fascist, or the other type of fascism that was race-based with the N letter, right? By a guy in Germany, right? Those terms, right? What I mean by that is those terms, you now throw that certain term towards anyone you don't like. If they pass a law you don't like, you call them this, right? You call them racist, you call them fascist, you call them, you get it. And it's got nothing to do with any understanding of the actual politics or atrocities committed in the past, right? It's completely disconnected from reality. It's just become this sort of catch-all term that you can attach to anyone, regardless of what they actually believe or say. Same thing with defending democracy, right? We could uphold a dictatorship somewhere and say it's all for the sake of defending democracy as long as it's someone we like. We can take other countries that are democratic and call them dictatorships on a dime because it's doing something we don't like, right? Remember all the blatancy with the elections in Romania, right? Supporting the, protests in Romania, in Georgia, but then in France, you can, or in Britain, you can use a lot of force to put down protests, and that's defending democracy. But in Georgia, it's upholding democracy because they pass a law about transparency. You get my point, right? The terms mean nothing. They can be used for anything. I remember in the Screwtape Letters, there's this little chapter at the end. Screwtape gives a toast where it's like from the perspective of this demon in this fictional piece of literature, congratulating himself and Satan and all of them because one of the most useful things they'd done is convinced everyone how useful democracy was, but they took all the meaning out of the term, so now you could use democracy to do anything you want, enforce any kind of violence or tyranny or anything evil. You could just call it democracy because now the term has no meaning at all. Same thing here, right? Make America great again sounds good. Sure, sounds good. But what do you mean by that? If you say make America great again, is that right after the end of the Cold War where America could kind of just order countries around and no one could resist? Is it sort of like a Bush era take on making America great again? Well, that looks very different from, I don't know, George Washington era. It's a country of these sort of ideals with a very clear cultural, religious type of framework, maybe. More isolationist, maybe. We don't get involved in foreign wars. Monroe Doctrine. Early industrial era, we were a nation that's just economically self-sufficient and growing very quickly in terms of economics. There's all different ways you could define this, think of this, and orient yourself. And to be completely honest, I've never gotten the impression that Trump has had a very clearly hammered out, coherent idea of exactly what he means. It's more like it's run on nostalgia, right? I remember a time when I was prouder to be American, when we seemed more cohesive, we seemed more unified. Okay. But you can't just slap a coat of paint on an old car with engine issues and expect it to be able to do well racing on a drag strip somewhere, right? You got to fix the engine issues. You got to figure out why it's breaking down. You can't just decorate it up. And this is what it feels like. So with Trump, I don't feel like there ever was a coherent view of exactly what was meant by that. So at one time, he was talking more spheres of influence, right? Some of this more 1800s, America is economically self-sufficient, industrialized, maybe doesn't get as involved with foreign military adventures, all this kind of stuff. And now all of a sudden he gets in, and people start whispering in his ear, it's like, this is going to take down American greatness if the Russians win Ukraine, right? Remember, American greatness was back when George Bush could snap his fingers, or Bill Clinton could snap his fingers, and all the countries listened. It's like, oh yeah, that's what it feels like. It feels like there's not a coherent view of what does he mean by great. That's where it's kind of an empty slogan. Make America great again. In what sense? In what time frame? Because it wasn't great in all of these different metrics all at the same time and in the same way. And some of them are trade-offs. If you're trying to say economically self-sufficient, or maybe with some sort of strong moral compass and sense of like American identity, that kind of goes against this global police force, mass globalization involved with every other country, where all these other cultures are now all mixed together and American culture gets kind of washed out, right? They're kind of mutually exclusive. A lot of these different ways in which you can interpret American greatness, yeah, they don't work together. And so as a result, I think it's kind of a little bit of all of these things. I think Trump's ego's a bit out of control. I think probably after going through all the stress and all, he's not as clear and as grounded anymore. But I think at the same time, there is something to do with sort of his own, I'll call it propaganda in the sense, because I don't think his Make America Great Again had a very clear vision. I'm not saying that parts of it weren't good. I'm not saying that a lot of the people who supported it weren't doing it sincerely. And I'm not saying there aren't parts of it that I was behind or am behind, right? But I still think it was so lacking in substance that now that Trump himself is not very grounded, it's easy now to just go off every time. Lindsey Graham comes along now and just has to wrap something up as it's tied to keeping America great. Well, that's very different than if Tulsi Gabbard says we need to do this to make America great, or Vance says we need to do this to make America great, right? Or Ben Shapiro says something on the Daily Wire and Trump watches it, right? Or the people over at Fox, right? All of these different visions of America great are very different. And I think now that Trump is just kind of getting worn down, I don't think he has he's losing that ability to actually stay the course on stuff, because he never had that much of a clear grounding to begin with. So on that super optimistic, positive note, please like, comment, subscribe, and share the videos. Especially starting out a channel, it takes a while for the algorithm to even start suggesting. So share the videos around. It shows a few different people watching it and all. That can kind of help. So yeah, please do help me out, get things going on that. And let's all pray that maybe these negotiations coming up do go better, and maybe we can get something moving towards an end to all the bloodshed and bring a little bit more peace. my cynical realist isn't the most optimistic that it's going to actually pan out. But that's still what we should all be hoping for. All right, y'all have a good one.